the way he did, which seemed to me even more dramatic than a speech at American University.
There are a lot of people in Israel who criticize the way the Prime Minister is handling this. My newspaper has an interview with the President of Israel, which will be published on Friday, in which he criticizes the way that the Prime Minister is handling relations with the United States, especially on the issue of Iran, and he thinks that the Prime Minister should show more restraint. But one does not negate the other. You can be critical of the Prime Minister and still be offended, say, by the tone of the President.
Yeah, being offended by both, you're saying. I want to come back to this, because you have the idea that the Prime Minister would be much better if he'd come over and said, let me speak to some people, let me make clearly the points that I believe in, and let's have a dialogue here rather than going full force against the President.
No, I think if it's a stark choice of yes or no, it doesn't give you a lot of chance to influence things, and essentially it's a black or white decision. What I testified on earlier this week before the Senate Armed Services Committee, where I actually think the United States will come out, will be something a little bit in between. That if there is a decision to go ahead with the agreement, there will have to be added to it, whether formally or informally, a set of conditions. What would be intolerable that Iran would do now in way of non-compliance? What would be intolerable in 10 or 15 years in terms of their nuclear arsenal? What we would do in order to reassure Israel, the Saudis, and others in the meantime. So say in the case of the Saudis or the UAE, they're not tempted to go ahead and have nuclear programs.
So what happens to the agreement if we put all these conditions to it? Do the Iranians have to agree to?
No. These would be unilateral American statements. They wouldn't necessarily be amendments to the treaty. What I'm thinking of is either a White House statement or some companion legislation or a joint resolution that would make it clear how the United States plans to address what I would claim that are the clear flaws in this agreement.
With the impact of law.
Which hopefully the President would back. And again, I think this is a seriously flawed agreement. That's my own view. But if it is going to come into effect, then I think it's incumbent on the United States to address and compensate for those flaws.
You've talked to a lot of members of the intelligence community in Israel, or at least one.
Well, the interesting thing is there's an impression in the United States that all of Israel is against this. And I think that AIPAC and other lobbyists have tried to, push that across. Obviously, the political establishment in Israel, including the Labor Party, is against the deal. But if you talk to former intelligence officials, former heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, which is the Internal Security Service, people in the Defense Ministry, about 70 of them have signed a letter saying, look, this deal might not be perfect, there's some real problems with it, but it's basically a done deal, and it is harming Israel to continue to object to it instead of moving forward to focus on how will we convince President Obama to really focus on interdiction of Iranian arms shipments to Hezbollah and the whole series of other issues that they're worried about when the sanctions are lifted. And so I think it's totally proper to focus on, as Richard was on, downstream issues. But first you have to get to the point where the deal is approved. And what was really striking to me about this speech today, Charlie, which I think was one of the most important of Barack Obama's presidency, this has been his top issue since the day he came to office, because he prioritizes nuclear weapons at the very top of his job, right? So he raised the stakes in two important ways. He basically said that the credibility, that was the word he used, of the United States was on the line, and that if the deal was defeated, we would no longer be the anchor of the international system of collective security which has existed since the end of World War II. We have been the leaders of the world in collective security. He said that will end if the deal is rejected. The other thing he did to raise the stakes I thought was fascinating was he intentionally delivered a highly partisan speech in which he was essentially saying to the Democratic Party, you desert me on this, you're no longer Democrats. This is a bedrock issue for you if you're a Democrat.
They desert him on this, he's in trouble.
Right. So, and the Republicans need 13 senators to desert. It's not likely, but he's trying to make sure that those 13 are not convinced by this powerful lobbying campaign.
Let's raise this question that you just said about the speech and what the President said. If this deal does not pass, and we're clearly going to have a huge debate, it's in force already, you see, with lobbying and every other kind of possible means to influence. Will it have an impact? Will we no longer be, in your judgment, the anchor for
Jordy, this deal's moving forward. This deal's moving forward even if there are 80 senators who vote in a joint resolution of disapproval. It's moving forward because the statutory sanctions block that's in the legislation that supposedly will prevent the president from giving the sanctions relief committed to the deal can be vitiated by the president using executive orders, by de-designating Iranian entities, and by declaring that the Central Bank of Iran, which is one of the key legislative sanctions, is that legislative sanction was unconstitutional. The president actually said that in 2012. So the president is moving forward with this deal. Nobody is killing this deal. The only question that one has to ask is, how do we actually empower the next president to be tougher, to actually implement some of the suggestions that Richard is making, to potentially go back and renegotiate key amendments to this deal, whether you think that's possible or not? The fact of the matter is, in U.S. history, there have been over 200 agreements, international agreements, where Congress has said, no, we want these amendments, and presidents have gone back and renegotiated agreements. And some of those were major agreements in the Cold War, where the Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear-tipped missiles aimed at us. So whether you think it can be done in legislation, as Richard has suggested, or through amending this deal, the fact of the matter is that you need to empower the next president to negotiate tougher with the Iranians or implement the current flawed agreement in a much more vigorous way. And I think that a vote of disapproval will actually do that.
So it just pulls a thread on the whole deal. I mean, it would be disastrous for the United States.
It's a different way to do it. I didn't much like the speech. I thought it was quite unpresidential. And I thought
it was quite partisan or what?
Yeah, and the fact that he disparaged critics who he said were wrong about Iraq or wrong about other issues. Well, someone could say, why should we listen to you, Mr. President, on this if you were wrong about Syria or Libya? I thought it was way over the top, and I thought he actually, in that sense, hurt his own case. But he did open the door on one interesting thing. He drew a parallel to the SALT and START agreements. And he said, look, this is a temporary arms control agreement. It's going to expire, parts of it, after 10 or 15 years on centrifuges or on enrichment. There could be follow-on agreements. So that, to me, is exactly the point. It's not so much amending this agreement, but I actually think one of the things we ought to start doing pronto is meet with the Europeans, with the Brits, the French, the Germans, and potentially with the Chinese and Russians, and talk about the follow-on agreement. Because we don't want
the Gulf nations.
Exactly, them too. We do not want, after 10 or 15 years, Iran to become an industrial-scale nuclear power. Whether they technically have weapons or they're one screwdriver turn away from that, that's not an acceptable outcome. So we ought to be thinking sooner rather than later about what is the follow-on agreement to this agreement.
What is your sense of where Senator Schumer is?
My sense is, first of all, that Senator Schumer, at least in some part, is where he wants to be. He's at the center of the world, and everybody is waiting.
Yes,
that's before he makes a decision.
That's just blonde hair. The next president of the United States of America.
I don't have any special knowledge. If I had to guess based on what
you got people reporting who know the Jewish community.
Their assumption is that he will vote against the deal.
The people talk about him. The assumption is he will vote against.
But he will not. He will not override a veto.
So he'll vote against, but not override a veto.
That's true, by the way. I think of many of the Democrats, even those that are already coming out and saying that they will oppose the deal. Yes.
But between the two votes, or after the initial vote to disapprove, then the presidential veto, that is when I believe the White House will have to engage in a conversation with senators and congressmen about what are the U.S. policies will be introduced into the mix. How would we specifically deal with suspected
So are you recommending that they have a vote against?
Not recommending.
In the first vote? Oh, well, do you think it will be the best thing? That I'm phrasing it in a way that gets the answer.
Whether it happens then or afterwards, I think the best thing is the United States effectively has an addendum to this agreement that would deal with three issues. How do we deal with noncompliance? Because the agreement is quite vague in many areas. What are we going to do regionally to offset the fact that Iran is going to have more resources to pursue its imperial aims? How are we going to reassure?
Has the president spoken to that?
I don't think so.
Well, yeah, he hasn't clearly spoken to it. Whether he's spoken to it enough in detail.
And then thirdly, how we're going to deal with the long-term
nuclear basically said, we know that some of this $100 billion is going to be used for that, but that it's high on our own.
Well, fine. Then what are we going to do about Syria? Because right now it's going to put Iran in a better position to support Bashar al-Assad. What are we going to do in terms of other challenges that Iran is fomenting with Hezbollah, with Hamas? It would be important to have this conversation.
I would repeat what he says. Yes, I mean, he says, look, we're trying to do that every day, regardless of this agreement.
But this agreement does exacerbate that to some extent.
Probably you would want that as a sense of a Senate resolution, not as binding law. You and I talk often about your view that the executive should have a free hand in foreign policy, so you wouldn't want Congress tying his hands, just going on record with what they should do.
Maybe the president on record. I can imagine a form